What I'd like to do is run through some of the basics of how to run a staff meeting, particularly if you're in a leadership role running a relatively decent size organization. So basically, why do we run staff meetings? They take so much of our time, and they really do need to have a point, and progress is something that you're trying to make as a result of having a staff meeting. Their intention is to increase organizational efficiency through communication of business objectives and relevance to employees, and that is very important. If the employee is not engaged, they're and not paying attention, it really is a waste of time. Another objective is to get maximum mileage from the meeting and encourage feedback, and really use this as an opportunity to build relationships and positive employee relations. It's a time to get together and really speak and talk as a group. So there's a lot of ways to deliver content. It could be basically a one-way flow. At times, a leader needs to do that to give instructions or clarify policies, a status report, if you will. There's also a lot of interaction that should take place in a staff meeting, the two-way flow of information between the leader and the participation. And again, feedback is something that should be expected. When I ran my largest group, which was roughly about, it was at its largest point, about 100 employees. So I'll kind of go through some of the meeting types that I used. Down there in the middle, you'll see organizational meeting or incentive meeting. Basically, twice a year, I would gather my group together for some highly directional, developmental, team building, social oriented meeting. Everybody, the entire organization would get together for 2.5 days. I would emphasize in some ways the strategies of the organization and how we were going to move forward, but spent really the majority of the time in developmental activities, reinforcing what that would look like and how that would look for each other's in each other's positions, and that was really helpful. I also had a project team. Whenever I would do one of these organizational meetings, I used a team to develop those exercises, and they would be, regardless of title, I'd get volunteers from throughout the organization, and they would help design the activities. What that did was it helped me translate into a language that was useful on the front lines. It also created buy-in for the strategic direction. Moving up to the top there, the 411 meetings, I would run a monthly conference call, and I would have it run by not by me and not by one of my direct reports, but really a third level, like call it supervisory level. And that was to, they would collect topics, they would surface things that were important from their perspective, and it really showed this idea of shared leadership. And that was very helpful, and the entire organization was included in that call. It was usually about an hour, and people could ask questions. And me in my role as the senior person, I sort of sat back and really acted more as a resource for the group. Then there was this thing, our manager meetings, which we called the war rooms. That was a popular term at the time. And for the war rooms, those were really dealing with me and my direct reports, and on management issues, but really the tactical issues. How are we moving things forward? And that was a weekly meeting. It was usually an hour, and status on project teams, problems that were coming up in the organization. So that was a very useful meeting for all of us to sort of get on the same page. There are times where you just need to have like an urgent breaking news kind of thing. So, a term that you could use for this is formation. You basically just say, look, at everybody gather around in the lobby, or in the middle of the office, or set up a quick conference call and make a quick announcement. And this would be like a 5 or a 10-minute meeting, really, literally short, to the point. Those can be very effective. Let's talk meetings. I would, visit the various offices I had around the country, and even outside the country, and I could set up some one-on-one time to hear what people had to say. Or we could do informal group meetings. We can go out for group dinners, and I think those were important to just informally give folks a chance to relationship build and things along those lines. PMP, which I'm calling Performance Management Process meetings, that would be my annual meeting with my management team, where we would review basically the performance of the organization, individual by individual, potential by potential. We would try to uncover any general development issues that were required in the organization that we can create training plans around, or development plans, or new activities. We would come up with maybe gaps in the organization if we had to do any particular set new goals, if you will. Maybe make adjustments to our strategic plan. So that would be sort of a super war room, if you will, that was once a year, totally concentrated on the strategy in the organization. And then lastly, participation meetings. So in those, it would be, where do we strategically take people from our organization and participate in the meetings of other organizations to sort of get a well-rounded picture of what's going on in the organization. So, when you're running the meeting, obviously being honest and to the point. You're not hiding anything. If you don't know something, you say you don't know something. If you can say something, you say you can't, but you just got to be honest. Obviously, always have a reason for the meeting and a reason for the topics, and address, the personal impacts of the employee, and where possible, spell out the action by step-by-step procedures that any announcement might have, if appropriate. You should practice in advance for your meeting. I mean, you are management in this case, so you have to come across as enthusiastic and confident, and you got to know your message. Again, including employees in that within the organization is very helpful. If you can have them help you with your message, it'll help you be a lot more effective. Keeping in mind that we don't really remember everything that we hear, so whatever you do in terms of presentations, this is the reason why I spend so much time doing physical and group activities, because 90% of what we retain comes from when we say a thing and when we do a thing. If we just read it, if we just hear it, if we just see it, the odds of them being able to retain it goes down dramatically. And the same thing for recalling. So, when you look at what we recall, really after 3 days, we'll only retain about 65% of what we see and hear. And that's really what you want. You want to make sure that you're constantly reinforcing your message and constantly finding new and different ways and alternative ways to present your message. Preparing for a staff meeting, very often having an agenda in advance is a great idea. And of course, if you could leave room, that's terrific. Unfortunately, some people use an agenda as an excuse not to make a point. Sometimes these agendas are loaded with way too many topics, and it diffuses any action as a result of the meeting. You want to keep your agenda fairly tight, your issues well defined. Really focus on the information that's needed. Just kind of throwing information out there that's sort of irrelevant can drag a meeting down. You should have in the back of your mind general time frames of how long you want each topic to take. If you have a topic that you want to have a lot of discussion for, then maybe the meeting should just be around that one topic, right? I wouldn't suggest posting times on an agenda unless you're very, very confident and it's very well timed out. But when you set times around the agenda, you kind of lock yourself in, and sometimes you just need some flexibility to move one. You might want to switch emphasis from one topic to another. So, but in the back of your mind, you'll have an idea of the time frames and how you'd like a meeting to proceed. Here's a list of some general rules. Some of these I've already addressed about the honesty and the business reasons. You certainly wouldn't be a bad idea, like I did with my large organizational meetings, to have pre-meetings and focus groups to kind of work through your message and have kind of test how it lands on folks. So that's important. If it ever possible, try to involve all the participants in a meeting. That could be quite helpful. Keeping the meeting at a decent pace, that's important too. I mean, frankly, you'll see very often meetings kind of drag down, or one or two people will dominate in a group of 10, and then you have the other people just not listening, and that never works out. Being open too. So legitimize risk taking. If somebody makes a point, you certainly, even if you don't agree with the point, slamming a point down, and it's just a way, even if the whole group thought that the idea was a bad idea, watching you smash the idea would prevent anybody really down the road of raising a point again. So it's good to take every point of view with respect. I think that's very, very important. And be always be enthusiastic. Always show that you're interested and you care about what you're talking about and you care about the organization. That's really, really important. And then you're on top of things and that you know what's going on. So, meeting norms, it's good for your organization to know why you're having meetings. So, having goals is important. The fact that you actually want to know, learn from people, and you want to take advantage of the diversity. So being sensitive to the various people in the group and how they process information. You want to make sure that it's known that participation is expected. You want to make it known that meetings are a great place to test out new ideas and experiment. We also want people to come to meetings with a sense of responsibility to help the meeting succeed. Very often, if you have a manager who is the owner and only owns the meeting and owns the agenda and owns everything about it, the participants don't necessarily take responsibility at that point, and that's ineffective, quite frankly. Being open to feedback is important. Praising ideas of the staff and trying to avoid the right versus wrong stuff. Once folks feel that they're not being listened to, you've lost them, and it's very hard to gain that back. I guess when you're giving feedback to the group, you can define what the good behaviors look like, and maybe point out things that maybe didn't work so well and how they could have been done differently. You're not in these group meetings to critique any individual or criticize personalities or anything along those lines. But it's a good opportunity to to demonstrate and teach and and help participants learn, and that's really important too. It's reinforcing and aiding the learning process. Meetings can be a fantastic time for organizational development. It is sad that so many meetings that occur don't take advantage of learning, and they sort of are just time takers as opposed to anything else. But it's good for the leader and the participants to understand the these basic norms, right? It's good too for a leader of a meeting to keep their personal viewpoint in the back of their mind, unless it's something that's so totally critical, that there's no leeway in it, like a policy or something along those lines. But in the back of your mind, you want to know what you want to say, and guide the discussion and down a certain path, and don't let people move off topic and whatever. So that's sort of important. It's if people ask questions, it's not a bad idea to clarify if you don't understand, or rephrase or the question, or enrich it in a way that broadens the way you want to answer. So that's, I think, that could be very, very useful. If you can get more people to ask questions as opposed to one or two, I think that would be extremely helpful to improve the group dynamic. So that's kind of important. So depersonalizing things too, and diffusing emotion by asking questions in a kind of polite, sensitive way. So those are all things that could really help a manager in implementing a good meeting. You don't want to get into one-on-one discussions. That really drags a meeting down when you have two people constantly talking and everybody else kind of daydreaming. That could really work to your disadvantage. So let's see. I guess if you you don't want to say, "Is my answer good?" You don't want to set up a situation where you're being critiqued in the middle of the room. So that's sort of a bad thing. You answer your question and make sure you're connecting it to important business issues and organizational strategies. And generally speaking, if you do that, you'll end up leaving a positive impact. Again, if you don't know something, or if you can't say something, just make sure that you say it, and don't try to bluff your way through a question that when it's asked to you. So I find even though before I said don't set definitive timelines within your meeting, it's good to start a meeting on time. It's good to end a meeting on time. Otherwise, you're taking advantage of other people's time, and you must keep in the forefront on that issue of time, that time is the one precious thing that people have, and pretty much every person wants to have some control over their own time. And if you come across as somebody who's impeding on that, you can really damage your relationship. So being respectful of that time, it's almost one of the most important things that a manager can do. Obviously, you need to be at the meeting on time, and you should expect that your team does as well. You should sort of, keep this idea of your meeting goals in mind, and the idea of, full participation. So that's kind of important. We discussed in a previous segment the idea of consensus. So that's certainly when you're making decisions, being strong on driving the group towards a general agreement and direction. And it's good to actually at the end sort of recap a meeting and sort of say what you agreed to, and maybe have some meeting notes that you could send out to folks, so that every sort of folks know what their to-dos are and what their action plans are, and what their follow-up steps are. So I hope you found that interesting and useful, and I look forward to our subsequent sessions. Thank you.